Welcome to the 7th episode of the Animal Riot Podcast, brought to you by Animal Riot Press, a literary press for books that matter. It's your producer, Katie, here, and this episode has been edited to reflect our new name. If you're new to the Animal Riot community, welcome, and you can find out more about us at animalriotpress.com. Now on to the episode with your hosts, Brian Birnbaum, and today's guests, Devin Kelly and Caits Meissner.
This marks the first episode of a two-part series about prison reform, which will inevitably lead to issues of social justice and the like. Right now we're here with Devin Kelly, whom some of our listeners might remember as the OG of the reading series, along with Katie. And Caits Meissner, right? That's right? Okay, yeah. She just told us about how everyone was fucking up her name in the last radio show, so wanted to make sure. And the director of the prison writing program at Penn America. Yeah. And I also want to make like a bad dad joke about how like your parents loved you so much that they wanted to name you as if there were two of you.
It's a nickname.
I see. Caits. I see.
Yeah.
Okay, we'll get into that.
I have a government.
I see. All right. So I'm going to do a rant about this hour's brand of fuckery, which is brought to you by governmental cronyism, I guess I'd say. Basically, we got representatives of federal agencies such as the FDA and DEA crusading state legislative bodies to impose a ban on Kratom. Kratom. We're just going to go with that. No one knows how to say it. It's a Southeast Asian plant with pain-relieving and mood-enhancing properties. It would be disingenuous to deny that it has habit-forming potential, but as it would to say, sugar, alcohol, and legal opioids don't. So, But Kratom has offered hundreds of thousands, maybe millions of opioid users a safer alternative, whether it be to life-threatening addiction, Suboxone, and or a real need for pain management. So like many of the government's impulses to control our behavior, I find it ironic that amidst a self-proclaimed opioid crisis, they're concerned about banning a substance, Kratom, that's caused less total casualties than an hour's worth of opioid overdoses. So we're here drinking Kratom right now. A couple of 75% of us in the room are. But yeah, I'm going to shut up about that now. I just thought it was apropos because if they do ban it, then that will throw hundreds of thousands of people into the group arbitrarily known as criminals. So let's drink it while it's legal and into its illegality. Cheers, everyone. Okay, so yeah, let's have you guys introduce yourselves now that I've rambled for 20 minutes. Devin?
I am Devin Kelly. I am a writer and teacher living in New York City. My bio is getting shorter each time I appear.
Yeah, I like that. We're gonna at some point you're just gonna implode into
I am
a non-physical spiritual entity.
I am who is.
Yes.
Or become a symbol.
Yes.
Like the writer formerly known as Devin Kelly.
Oh, beautiful.
Yeah.
Beautiful.
It's better than the long bios when they're read at an event and you're like, oh my God, my bio didn't look that long when I submitted it. Can you please stop?
I think the goal of any writer is actually to have your bio get shorter.
I think so too.
I think until you are simply your name.
Yeah.
And then simply nothing.
This is getting pretty existential pretty fast.
Yeah. And now I want to comment about how, those bios will have 80 publications listed.
Yeah.
And I'll be really? We get it. You're good. We got it. Anyway, go ahead, Caits.
Well, I'm Caits Meissner. Not my real name.
Meissner.
Meissner.
So,
Meissner,
so the Z,
but people do Meissner, and, it feels fine.
Okay, cool.
Feels great.
Great.
Caits was my nickname growing up that I hated, and then I claimed it in my adulthood because it made me feel warm that everyone called me it. And it seemed to fit me. I'm also a writer, poet primarily, illustrator, coming back to that after many years, longtime educator, and currently, as you said, working, overseeing the prison and justice writing initiatives at Penn America.
Oh, is that what it's formally called? So I totally butchered it. I call it, what did I call it?
Prison and Justice Writing Program. That's what it's called.
Okay, cool.
I just put initiatives in there. It sounds a little bit more exciting.
Yes.
Yeah.
Initiatives. Yes. Agency.
Yeah.
Yeah. So let's start with that. I want to, or maybe I should prelude with the fact that I'm going to be trying to get involved with all of this. So yeah, tell us what you do and all of the things you do and why you do them.
Well, that's a lot of things. I can start with maybe what I do at Penn, or what Penn is, what the programs are at Penn, and then we can also talk about as a writer down the line how to get involved, because before I was at Penn, I was teaching in prisons, and then I also did a tour for my book in prisons.
Ooh,
yeah.
I really like that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
You went all over.
but it's not that easy to do, actually, interestingly.
No,
so
I can imagine.
We'll get into all that. But so at Penn, we have two primary programs. One is the prison writing program. It's a 4-decade-old project that is exclusively run through the mail. So much mail comes onto my desk every day. And through that, we have a handbook for writers in prison that we're actually rewriting starting in the winter, which is a very exciting project. We send about 500 for free of those a month to folks in prison. Anybody who requests it can get it for free. Through that, people find out about our prison writing awards. Those have been going on for 30 years. We award cash prizes, publication. For the first time, we did an annual anthology this year. Molly Crabapple did the cover. I'm very proud of it.
Ooh.
And through
And
that...
who is Molly Crabapple for those of us who...
Oh, she's somebody I really admire. She's also primarily an artist, illustrator, but also writer.
Yeah.
I read her memoir, Drawing in Blood, and she has a new book out that's co-written with somebody else. Anyway, look her up. She's really fantastic.
Okay,
Social
cool.
justice oriented, really
I told you
interesting
we'd get
person.
There it
Yep.
is.
There's justice.
Devin told us.
Well, justice is embedded in the conversation because
Yeah.
criminal justice,
course.
there's the word justice right there.
They
though.
conflate, yes.
Yeah, pretty debatable in our system. So last thing in there is that people can join our mentor program through the contest, and that is a 3-time exchange at least. That's what's asked with a working writer on the outside, and then many times those mentorships go on for much longer. We have about 250 active at any time, fluctuates. So that's the prison writing program as it has been for many years, that I'm very proud to now be overseeing with my colleague, Robbie Pollack, who really takes charge of that program's day-to-day and visions the future of it as well. And the other side of it is brand new. It's the Writing for Justice Fellowship, which was funded by Agnes Gunn's Art for Justice Fund. And we said 6, then we awarded 10 writers, currently, formerly, and not ever incarcerated, to write about critical issues connected to mass incarceration. Through that, of course, there's many, many other things being done. We do really incredible, I think, multimedia, community-oriented events. Yeah. A lot of stuff coming up in the future that's not on the record yet.
So, yeah, I mean, this just happens to be one of the things you said last, but I do like the idea of not only people that have been in the prison system being able to write about this stuff too, just because that we've talked about this on some of our earlier episodes about how it's tough these days. If you're not, this demographic, are you allowed to write about something like that, But I think it's important, if you're passionate about it,
Well, I think about it
get
as
involved,
I think about it as an ecosystem, and that we actually need everyone to care about it because the system is massive, and we need people who have no stake in it to give a shit about it, essentially, in order to change it.
I feel the same way. Yeah.
But I think I think a lot of the pushback, or a lot of where that energy comes from, is that people's voices have historically been so left out. So it's an ethical line you walk with. How do we make sure that there are seats at the table with people who have direct lived experience? Their stories are expertise. They are important, but we also put them in conversation with folks who don't necessarily have that lived experience, but have other skills, ideas, identities, experience they bring to the table.
Yeah. One of I guess what I'm most curious about is the people involved with this program, especially, and we talked about this, the vocabulary, inmates, prisoners, we didn't know exactly what to agree on. But anyways, what kind of transition have you seen from them being involved in the program while incarcerated and then afterwards? Are they still involved in some way? How much, how's it affected their lives? What have you seen? What's the data, I guess, Well,
there hasn't really been data, and I've only been there about a year, and the program was really pretty grassroots for a long time, beautifully, but that means that there was no data collected. And because it's a national program, it's hard to really say, who went through the program, who was impacted. A lot of the folks that have been cycling through, who have won awards, kind of risen to the top year after year, and we get about 2,000 submissions a year, so across 5 genres. A lot of them are in for life. We have a lot of people who have long sentences or in for life who end up being people who we see their writing continue to win, although we're trying to expand that and move out of the everyday voice and also give other opportunities to writers that we know that come along our desk.
It's kind of morbid, but now I feel like this episode could be called Long Sentences.
Well, that's actually a project we're working on. Is actually about
Really?
Life and death in prison, so being sentenced to life without parole or death penalty.
Yeah.
And we do have a couple death penalty writers as well.
I mean, that's maximalism to its an unfortunate logical terminus.
Sure.
Yeah, that's super interesting. I can't wait to get involved. Yeah, and we got to talk about that after this.
Absolutely.
But yeah, Devin, say something about this.
Well, I was gonna,
something. You in college, were you studying mainly Black literature? I'm curious.
Well, I was
I
minored. I was an English and history major and was an African American studies minor.
And did you guys? I mean, because in some way, I don't know if you'd agree with this, Caits, but the incarceration system's kind of like modern day slavery in a lot of ways. I didn't know if that was a big topic, but
sure.
I agree.
Didn't
I
want to.
That was when I mean, in college was when I read Autobiography of Malcolm X for the first time. It's when I read
that changed.
The New Jim Crow, which came out I think when I was in college. And then also, I mean, I think English literature has a history, I think, that people are maybe not as aware of prison writing. One of my favorite American poets is Etheridge Knight.
Mine too.
Who was incarcerated for 8 years for bank robbery. Same time period as Gwendolyn Brooks, I believe, and wrote one of my favorite poems, Feelin' Fucked Up, which is a great poem to teach.
Ooh, that's a great title.
Yeah.
I got to read that.
It's a great poem. I used to know it by heart because I would teach it so often.
Be easy enough to pull up too.
Yeah, it's a great poem. Fuck Marx, it goes on. All I want is my woman back so my soul can sing, right? But he wrote, I mean, and he wrote his first book from prison.
That's what I was going to ask if you had started after.
Yeah. And yeah.
Oh, our producers have brought it up.
Should we read it?
Yeah.
Should we read it?
I kind of love that idea. Yeah.
I will read it. I'll pull it up on my phone so I can read it here.
We've been meaning to do get people to read their own work on here, so this could be a nice little.
I believe the first line
stone.
is Lord, she's done, left me, gone, packed up, split, right?
Yeah,
Real close.
I'm looking
Lord,
at it.
She's gone, done, left me, done, packed
Oh,
up,
it's
and
so,
split.
Yeah, it's such a great and that weird. I wish people could see it. The slash. But yeah, this is Feelin' Fucked Up by Etheridge Knight. Lord, she's gone, done, left me, done, packed up and split, and I with no way to make her come back. And everywhere the world is bare, bright, bone white, crystal sand glistens, dope, death, dead, dying and jiving drove her away, made her take her laughter and her smiles and her softness and her midnight sighs. Fuck Coltrane and music and clouds drifting in the sky. Fuck the sea and trees and the sky and birds and alligators and all the animals that roam the earth. Fuck Marx and Mao. Fuck Fidel and Nkrumah and democracy and communism. Fuck smack and pot and red ripe tomatoes. Fuck Joseph. Fuck Mary. Fuck God, Jesus, and all the disciples. Fuck Fanon, Nixon, and Malcolm. Fuck the revolution. Fuck freedom. Fuck the whole motherfucking thing. All I want now is my woman back so my soul can sing. But yeah, he wrote that, I believe, in prison. And while he was in prison, I think his introduction to poetry was just letter writing. I believe he wrote poets he admired, like Gwendolyn Brooks, and started up a sort of conversation with them. And then someone from Broadside Press, I don't think that's a press anymore, heard about his work. And I believe the moment he got out of prison, his book was published. And I think it was called Letters from Prison.
When was this?
I want to say 60s. He died in 96.
I think late 60s. But I can't remember the details as well.
Yeah. What were the circumstances surrounding the bank robbery and everything?
I mean,
I
don't know exactly. I mean, he did rob the bank. He was very upset that the sentence was so long.
Yeah. And no one got hurt.
I think he might have been a drug user.
Yeah. So that's
yeah.
And I would love to do a whole podcast on addiction just because if you're talking about free will and your choices to do things, that definitely, to me, drug use almost proves that free will might not exist just because of what it makes you do. And I think that's what's really important, especially bringing it back to prison reform. It's how it seems like we're more interested as a society. We were talking about this with shaming celebrities and rightfully so in a lot of situations to a certain degree, especially with Me Too and stuff. But the difference between condemning and shaming or figuring out how to solve the problem. It seems like we are definitely more interested in economically exploiting a problem
Sure.
Because it's easy to say, these are bad people, let's make them go do work for 10 years, blah, blah, blah. So yeah, that's why I asked.
Yeah.
That's why I asked, if he's...
Sure. And also to your, I think, original point about getting involved and about the differences of sort of demographic differences of people. Etheridge Knight, to tie it back to him, has a poem called like a white woman wasp.
I love that
visits
poem.
A black,
Woo! We should read that one.
It's like visits a black junkie in prison.
Yeah, it's great.
And it's a bit longer, and like the first few stanzas are sort of about like why this woman's even coming to visit him, and it's sort of an internal monologue, and they end up at the end, the final stanza, their common ground has nothing to do with being like her visiting him or him being in jail. It has to be with the fact that she has a child, right? Or they both have children. And like that's how it sort of ends. No. Like it's just like there's like the poem is almost about this searching for how do people find a denominator to meet on, and sometimes it's so wildly unrelated to, sometimes we focus so much on where people are in their circumstances or like whatever as we search for denominators, and it ends up being as simple as the fact that they both have children. And like I think the last line is about like them, about her talking, I don't know, they're laughing about her child like making a mess in the room or something like that. I don't know if that's completely accurate, but
as far as I can remember.
Yeah.
I'm not good at remembering details, but you seem to be much better than I am, Devin. But that poem has so many layers and implications when thinking about who goes into prison to do what work, which is why I love it so much, because it hits on all of the nuance in different parts of the piece.
Sure. I feel like Caits should talk about your background, what led you to working.
Yeah.
Because I know that your background is in large part as an educator. And perhaps how did that inform you? How did that drive you to where you are now?
Yeah.
Sure.
What got you passionate about this stuff? Like,
my mother likes to remind me that when I was 14 and I was a camp counselor, I was teaching school to prison pipeline workshops using this video out of the Ella Baker Center called Books, Not Bars, which I believe is on YouTube and sadly really holds up still. So I've always been interested in the conversation. When I saw that film, obviously it did something to me when I was young. And then much later, I taught public schools, etc. I have a whole nonprofit community teaching background, and I was at Tribeca Film Institute managing their education program, and we did some work at Rikers Island. So that put me in the space. I think I was maybe 20 or 19 which is much earlier. Yeah. That's the word I'm looking for. Much earlier on, where I went to Rikers and also performed as a poet. So I had a couple experiences there, and that's a very harrowing place. And then I was leaving Tribeca to teach part-time and go to grad school. And I got a couple calls in the same week, and essentially that led me to teaching in a women's prison at Bedford Hills every week for a few years, and also teaching teenagers, I believe, at Crossroads Juvenile Detention Center first, then Rikers Island, then that sort of set it off. So I got in the spaces again in a really deep way. And the teenagers were hard as they always are hard, and it was heartbreaking and difficult. But the adults, which is what everybody says when they teach prison and work with adults, is where I really kind of fell in love with that work, because it was such a hyper-intense classroom, and anyone who's ever taught knows that you're competing with people's cell phones and people's life distractions, and people are, relatively privileged in the fact that they even have access to education. But in the room, all these folks had signed up who were really desperate to learn and hungry, and there was no distraction. And
I think that's the first thing that would strike me about going in. I think the first feeling I'll have is being like overwhelmed with guilt.
Yeah, I can see what you mean. Well, you do. I mean, that never goes away.
You're looking at that question like you can't answer it. Our producers just put a question up on the on the Word document.
It was who was the first person to make an impression on me in that space and why. But I'm like everybody. I there's not even an answer to it, because there's so many people. And so many people still. You don't want to upset
someone?
No.
I'm just kidding.
I remember everybody I've ever taught. I mean, that's somebody specific. I mean, of course, I don't even know where to start with that.
Well, okay.
I can think about more maybe moments. I mean, and it changes time to time. It depends on if it's a women's prison or a men's prison or young people or adults.
Does Rikers have a division for both, or is that just men, or what?
Both.
It's both. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, if so, here's a way to talk about a specific person. the second part you're gonna be on with Sergio. Yeah. So how did you meet Sergio de la Pava and his wife Susanna, who are two of the greatest people on this earth?
Well, I have not met Susanna. I look forward.
You haven't met Susanna, okay?
But Sergio I met because
they're just tireless is genius and tireless are the two words I would use to describe them. They're just
you'll G and T.
And generous, which can also be
generous.
a G.
Yeah. Okay, we're never gonna stop here. But yeah, no, we're talking about someone who wrote a Ulysses-esque, literary catechism when he was. He's a public defendant, working 80 hours a week, whatever. I don't know how these people do it. But anyway, how'd you guys meet and how is he involved in stuff? And
I invited him. He does a lot of work with Penn, so
I can imagine.
He's very, very generous with the organization overall. But in terms of my department, I invited him to read a piece on behalf of somebody in prison who won an award. An excerpt.
Oh, that's cool.
And he came and read at the event, and then I invited him also to speak with our fellows, and we had our gathering with everybody in New York City because the fellows are across the country. And he came we had different writers who were writing about criminal justice in different genres come for a kind of informal lunch, and he was somebody who came to the table as well. So that's how I know him, through this work.
That's cool. Yeah, I can't wait to have both of you guys on here. It's going to be a lot of fun.
I'm excited too. Yeah, I'm really honored.
I'm not going to lie. I'm going to be a little intimidated.
No, it's going to be great. I told him.
We've met, like we know him.
Well, I said, I know somebody who started a press based on being inspired by you. And he goes, oh, Brian?
Yeah, he knows.
I said, yeah, I guess you know, huh?
Yeah. Thanks to these guys too. They Devin and Katie got him to read.
Yeah, I said he loved it.
Okay, our producers want a Kratom check-in. I don't think you can probably feel it yet. No,
I'm feeling pretty normal.
But
pretty good.
Yeah,
pretty, not tired.
It
was mixed in my coffee.
I'm not drinking Kratom, but I once did a poetry reading at a kava and Kratom bar.
Yeah, that's right. Which was one of the weirdest experiences you'd ever had.
Because I'd never had kava or Kratom before.
It's time for a tangent about this.
I had never had kava or Kratom before, and I'm fairly innocent. Innocent's a bad word to use, but I'm fairly.
Yeah,
I'm not an experimental drug user. I like the simple ones.
Yeah,
alcohol. Yeah. But I read at this Kratom and Kava bar, and I felt obligated to have both because they were putting on this reading, and
I've never had Kava before.
Yeah, my mouth went numb, and I couldn't really feel my tongue, and
that could have been the Kratom.
Yes, and it was pouring outside, but it was also the most well-attended reading I've ever been to.
Wow,
there was like 60 people in this place that only fit.
That's what I'm saying. People like their Kratom, man.
Yeah,
I think Kava can be tough on your liver or something like that.
Yeah,
I have Kava stress relief tea that's just sold at your average old grocery store.
Yeah,
let us eat our cake. Yeah, that's all I say. Did you feel it? Like, did you feel the effects?
I stopped drinking the kava after that first one, and the crowd. I don't know if I was really, I don't know if I was really knowledgeable to what was happening, other than my mouth going numb. And then my friend George came with a fifth of whiskey, and we just snuck drinks of that, and that made everything better for me.
That would make me feel numb. I think.
I think that's the idea. That's alcohol's idea, is numbness.
I think many drugs, a lot
that's
of it
true.
is.
That's true.
I taught at a needle exchange, actually, up the street from here, 181st round there.
You taught at Needle Exchange?
A needle exchange.
A needle exchange.
Called the Corner Project a couple years ago, and worked with active intravenous drug users. Often who are nodding out at the table.
This is something that I would love to get involved in. That's really hard work.
It's really some of the most confronting work I've ever done.
I was a psychology major as an undergrad. My focus was addictions, and so I did like a bunch of addictions labs, and like I'm obsessed with addiction. Like,
I'm sure they'd be interested in another writing teacher. I couldn't continue it. It was a number of years ago now, but it's a drop-in center, so people were actively high often, which made the classroom a totally different space.
Sure. Right.
But of course, their whole framework is harm reduction, so it's not about trying to get people off the drug. It's about saying be safe and non-judgment and
that's what people do on Reddit. Like, Reddit literally has threads where it's like, this is about harm reduction. We're not trying to get you off drugs or whatever. Yeah. But like, there's like great communities online that like, Reddit is a cesspool for just like trolls and like.
Well, so is any.
But Reddit's like particularly like, you're gonna get some like unfortunate human honesty on there, But like, there is really good shit on there. Like I'm just being obsessed with addiction and drugs and like pharmacology and stuff. Like I just go through so many threads. And like the harm reduction thing is a really important thing. I feel like in America that's new.
Yeah.
I feel like it's like
came
the
about
condemnation
through the AIDS movement in the late
So that's
70s or late 80s. Maybe it's really ACT UP.
That's older
that
than I thought.
organization
Yeah. Well, I mean,
popularized
I don't think I would assume that many contemporary Americans don't even know what a needle exchange is.
Yeah, right.
Or that they exist.
Yeah.
Right.
And that there are people, I think people's conception of addiction is so often just tied to saying it's bad.
Yeah, and that's the problem.
Yeah.
Because and that ties back to the same thing about criminalizing things and like, exploiting it. Like, this is bad. You are a bad person for doing this. And like that doesn't help anyone.
Right.
Once you put shame and guilt, you make everything worse. Like you're not going to get someone to reform themselves, Even if you would call that reform, like, reformation. I don't know. Yeah. So yeah, I don't know. I'm super interested in that kind of stuff. But our producers have another question up on the board. Why are prison writing programs important? And what does writing do to an inmate's life? Should we just settle on inmate? Is that like acceptable?
Well, let's talk about that because I think that it's
Let's talk about
important
that
because
first.
it's about language and we're writers in this room, right? And
yes,
this is a writing
I couldn't
program.
agree more. Let's talk about that.
So there's a debate because, the Marshall Project actually did a big survey of folks in prison who are currently incarcerated. Which word do you prefer? And a lot of people said, well, we don't really care if you use inmate. But a lot of formerly incarcerated people have started a movement that's...
that makes sense. Formerly incarcerated saying like, now I'm like inexorably tied into like this, terminology, whatever,
Sure,
this
but
label,
but I have met a lot of people too, and it's symbolic that inmate is a word that they hear from prison guards. Oh, sorry, correctional officers. They don't like to be called guards. Speaking of language, so we've chosen that pen. I've chosen that pen not to use what I call state language. So we don't use inmate, convict, felon, offender. These are all words that people hear, are labeled with, etc. On a day-to-day basis, and obviously our work is about being expansive and layered and able to have different sides of yourself and to be a full human. So we do use prisoner mostly because it's shorthand and it's illustrative. So if somebody's in prison, they're a prisoner.
It's kind of just literal. It's not like necessarily pejorative. It's just what's happening. Like, it's not like, but it's funny you talked about like convict. When we came up with the idea to have you on and like, start getting into all this stuff, because like I care, we both really cared about it. One of my friends, Luke, in Seattle was like, yeah, you guys could call it pros and cons. And I was like, that's a really good pun.
Pretty clever.
It's pretty clever, but I don't think we can do that. I was the Katie. No, Katie was the one who was like, no.
Yeah, it's a sensitive world we're living in. But I get it, I've visited probably over 22 prisons and jails at this point. So I've met a lot of people writing in prison. And I try to listen to what folks are asking for,
And at any point, were you at any point, like, did you feel threatened or like anything like that? Was there any sort of, or like intimidation, like maybe the first couple times you went in, just because like, I don't think people should shy away from talking about that. You shouldn't say like, oh no, like, this is fine. Like, this is like a terrible system. We shouldn't be doing this. Like, it's okay to feel like, okay, like if someone's murdered someone here, like.
Well, I struggle with that because I think it's not nuanced totally.
Yeah,
I think that actually there's a lot of really hard conversations about humanity within this conversation, and mass incarceration is an easier thing to talk about because then we talk about the new Jim Crow, we talk about three strikes laws, and we talk about nonviolent crimes. But the fact is there are many, many violent crimes in prison, and people in prison have committed. And the conversation has to include it and stop dichotomizing that if we actually want to get anywhere, which requires much more difficult conversations. But in terms of have I ever been intimidated? I mean, every time I go in, I'm intimidated by the whole, it's made to feel intimidated. You go through gates and wire and scanners. And so the environment alone, of course, is totally intimidating.
It's interesting, the parallels between that and like in a sort of like, I hesitate to say like inner city school, but like, a school in a rough environment.
Absolutely. You
go
through metal detector.
Those parallels are striking. I mean, they're,
I mean, absolutely.
I mean, it's crazy being a teacher in a New York City public school building because I don't have to go through a metal detector every day when I walk in, but every single student does.
Yeah.
And so when we talk about so many of these,
even though like statistically, like you're just as likely to go in and like it's.
I mean, and I think I think these conversations need to include the ways in which our environments affect our understanding of both ourselves and the people.
Absolutely.
Either in environments we don't understand or environments that we generalize or we don't apply nuance to. And I feel that too. I think when people have conversations about criminal justice reform and prison abolition, so often it seems like they're talking about the much, though hard, easier subject of nonviolent crimes and things of that nature. When, yeah, I think the conversation has to include, like, if you want to advocate for prison abolition, you're advocating for prison abolition or reform for everyone,
right,
who is in prison, and that includes the people that are not the crimes that are not easy to sort of rhetorically, rhetorically unjustify or whatever. I don't know the right, but like,
right.
It's much harder to apply nuance to someone who is in prison for life for murder or for assault.
Except for when you meet them, and all of a sudden you go, oh, they're just a person. And I think that's the whole point and of what writing programs in prison do. And there's kind of this twofold thing happening, right? There's the education of people on the outside, so really humanizing, bringing people close to the fact that, 2.3 million people in prison times many, many, many others on parole, probation have gotten out of prison. I mean, that is not a minority of this country. I think half of the people in America I read recently have had a family member in prison or somebody close to them. Wow. So this is an issue that affects many, many, many people.
Yeah.
So how do we get people into the conversation where it is nuanced? Well, you got to then see. So how many times basically has somebody said to me, "Oh man, that person wrote that and they're in prison"? I'm like, well, just because they're in prison doesn't mean they're illiterate or stupid or not talented or not contributory.
I want to be the first to admit that, like, one of my first questions when I was getting interested in this was like, are people going to be interested in me coming in with this, like, this kind of ties into how Devin was talking on an earlier episode about, I think we did, about like the academia, how like academia is like inextricably tied from literature. But like, and we're trying to like disentangle that. But like, you have people that like, they haven't had the same life experience, and
some have.
I like talking about
some have,
but I'm talking about like I mean I've gotten in plenty of trouble, but like
some people have never gotten in trouble, and then all of a sudden they're in prison for something violent or nonviolent.
Yeah, and I mean, Jesus, there's so much that's like exploding from my mind right now. But
it's great. I think it's informative.
But like my implicit bias was like immediately was like, are people going to be interested in this? Who am I to come in with like this book with all my $10 fucking words and like, are they going to give a shit about like one of my like some like, I got one white Jewish character from like Affluence, like, like I don't, those things all started like racing through my mind.
And the answer is some people will and some people won't. And the people who are interested will sign up for it, and the people who won't are going to stay on the yard,
Which is also with the same, it's also the same with the world outside of
exactly.
Right, exactly.
And that's the implicit bias that I had. It was like, oh, there's something different here. No, there's not. It's not different at all.
Well, that's what the media wants to, that's the dominant narrative about who's in prison. So the writing program, part of our goal is to really get writing into the hands of, part of my goal really is to reintegrate exiled voices back into literary community, which is actually very difficult when there's walls between you and no internet. And even a liberal writing community, has a lot of bias or questions.
I think that's terrible that they don't have access to internet.
Well, it is terrible, and it's a security concern.
Sometimes
can, sometimes can't. So
I understand that.
Books yes, and
they could have some sort of like maybe they could beta test. Google can beta test the China version of their search engine in prison.
Costs a lot of money.
It's for censorship.
But that raises a whole series of questions about then how do we support people. So many questions. That's a big part of this new rewriting of this handbook, which is going to be more of a DIY self-organizing manual for folks on the inside who don't have to always rely on people from the outside coming in, because there's actually a lot of talent. For example, I was just at a prison outside of Minneapolis called Stillwater, and a writer there who's won our contest multiple times. He had a book published with University of Michigan Press.
Cool.
Incredible writer.
Uh-huh. And fiction, poetry?
Fiction, poetry, and nonfiction. He does all three very well. And he started the Writing Collective before there was any writing program there, and was really wanted to share that with me as a representative of Penn, I think, just because of the Prison Writing Awards' importance in his life. But he was also like, listen, we do this. And I was like, I know. And it's really inspiring. So, for example, I want him to write a short essay about how he did that, because it's not actually easy to organize within prison. So I think that that's one side of it, right, is the education that we get to do on the outside and the melting the calcified perceptions of who's in prison and all of that advocacy. But also what writing does for people in prison is obviously a variety of things. It does what it does for all of us on the outside, which we all have our reasons for writing, right, of course. But I think for people who come to writing while they're in prison, because you will get a mix of folks if you do a class, some who are self-identified writers and some who are like, I'm just interested and I want to pass the time, I want to get better at something.
Those are the more important targets just because like they...
I think both are, because...
Yeah, but just in, I was just saying in the sense of like, you get someone who knows what could happen.
Well, it's exciting.
When they're fresh. Like, it's like, Well,
it's totally exciting. And I think that what writing can do at best, so, of course there are people who want to write because it's their passion and their craft and they take it very seriously, like those of us who are capital W writers on the outside. And then there are folks who are, come in with an interest, and what writing can do at its best is help people redefine a narrative that they've been handed now. I made a mistake, or I did something pretty terrible potentially. How do you reconcile with that for the rest of your life? And people who come to writing classes typically, I think, are people who are more interested in really self-work and looking at themselves and being able to change the narrative, but also just self-esteem to be able, why would you even want to change your narrative? Or how would you even start if you don't even have a space to do it?
Right.
So I think there's something about the writing program space that gets to be kind of like non-prison for 2 hours, you know?
I'm curious, like I kind of want to get into like the Devin, do you have anything to add to that?
No.
Okay.
That's great.
Yeah. I want to get into like the nitty gritty of like what it, like you go in, you go through all this security, and like what room do you go to? Who's usually there? Like, what is it like getting people to sign up? What specific things do you do with them? Do you do you ever read to them from your stuff or like other people's stuff, or is it all just their writing and discussing? Like what are like some of the really
depends.
like,
I mean, so I've taught in housing units, which means I'm in where people live, their cells are. That's a really terrible, intense place to teach. I taught at the transgender housing unit.
Housing unit. That's not like a halfway house or something?
No,
like,
it's where people sleep in the prison. So
you're talking about within. Okay, I see.
If you've ever seen a TV show where it's, it's like a row of cell blocks.
Sure.
It's like that, and it looks different in every prison. But I was teaching, for example, at the transgender housing unit many years ago at MDC downtown, which is the Manhattan Jail.
They had a transgender housing unit.
They did, yeah.
Wow.
And
that's fascinating.
Lot to talk about there, but
yeah.
I was competing, my time for my class was the Wendy Williams show. So I was like, forget it. Like, nobody wanted to come sit and write. I mean, I had a couple of folks who would, and that one person in particular came week by week, and it made it special for me.
That's an analogy for like the state of literature in general.
Totally,
like,
totally. So
we're competing with the Wendy Williams show.
So there you are trying to, people where people live, they might want to go lay down, or they're, it's right before lunch, or they're hungry, and then there's officers all around, and that's, and the housing units are depressing. You're sitting at this tiny card table, and so there's that scenario. But typically I'm in a classroom, so it's usually looks like a public school classroom.
They just have them. They just have them.
Yeah, there's often schools or small conference rooms that I've been to. And, we get together and we do what we do. I mean, we do what we do in any classroom. So I come up with a theme for the semester and do a syllabus, and I teach it. And we read work.
So you basically run a class. Interesting.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. When I go on as a guest, that can be different, look different.
And what about like one-on-one? Like, because something that I saw that you guys did was that I'm like really interested in is like the one-on-one mentorship type thing.
That's all through the mail.
Okay, I see.
So
that's just strictly through mail.
None of Penn's work goes directly into prisons. We don't actually teach within the prison space because there are a lot of other programs doing that, and it's a national program, so there's a lot of reasons why that's intense. One of our big projects coming up is looking at creating a toolkit for people who want to start doing that work in prisons, because it's not an easy answer of how to get involved. So I visit prisons now primarily as a representative of the program. People want to bring me in to talk about the work we do, which is I always feel very grateful to get to do.
Sure.
In the past, I was teaching classes, so it looks a little different now when I go into prisons.
Huh. Interesting. I'm gonna ask like at risk of sounding like, you know, naive or like quixotic, because you guys both talked about like basically prison abolishment. You know, is that a word? Abolishment.
Abolition.
Abolition.
Abolishment works too, I believe.
More intense sounding. I like it.
So like yeah. So there's like the analog I'm thinking of is like when and I'm gonna use like really binary language just for argument's sake, like, you know, when conservatives that might like deny like climate change, you know, some of their argument for climate change proposals is like, yeah, this is great, but what's the alternative, right? Like, and there's a lot of stuff that's there, like, we know, but like, you know, so basically I'm interested in the same thing that people like who are more like, you know, we have to punish criminals, let's say, like if we abolish prisons, like, what is the alternative? What do you guys see? I don't know who wants to go first.
I mean, I think it. Well, I mean, this is going to be a non-specific answer to a very specific question. I mean, I think that it takes a radical shift in imagination and I think prison abolition would be truly tied to so many radical shifts in the way we view public housing, education,
guilt.
And like I mean, like,
you know,
and like
addiction,
addiction, like any sort of statewide system,
capitalism,
would need to. I mean, I don't think prison abolition exists truly in a deeply capitalist society or any capitalist society. I don't think that prison abolition exists in a society where public education looks the way it does now. I don't think it's possible. I think what
it's too inextricably tied to exploitation.
And I think if someone if I said I was a prison abolitionist and someone posed me that same question, I would say to them that the nature of our prison system, our criminal justice system now, is a direct reflection of the society that we live in, and a society that the state has allowed for, and the society the state has sort of propagated. And so like so maybe it doesn't start with like prison itself. I mean that all of it, and you need to provide, you know, there needs to be drastic mental health reform, there needs to be drastic education reform, there needs to be drastic reform on all sort of ways, in a radical way that allows for sort of the belief that every human being in this country has the same potential and access for the same quality of life that people with privilege have. And it's not as cut and dry a system as well. Like, you know, if you believe in prison abolition, then like, what do you do if, like, you know, Joe murders his family? And like, I don't have an answer
especially
for
how
that.
do the victims feel, like the victims' families,
and how do you? I mean, I think a better question is what does justice look like in a abolitionist society?
Right, and it's
that's a trickier question that ties into what our values are as a society and how we view each human being. You know,
I mean, I think that, Devin, you hit the nail on the head. It's spot on, and it's a tricky thing for me. I don't call myself a prison abolitionist because of all those questions I have. But I do think that we need people who are prison abolitionists on the front line really pushing the vision of what can and should be, instead of settling for something like, oh, let's do more community supervision. Well, that's just mass incarceration in a different form. We're shutting down Rikers but opening up all these new community jails. Well, okay, it puts people close to their families, but what is that really doing? So there's a lot of questions around, is reform really reform? And I think that the alternatives look like community intervention programs. It looks like treatment centers. It looks like restorative justice. Common Justice is an amazing organization in Brooklyn that works with people who have done violent crime and reconciling with victims and having the victim. Because our current criminal justice system, by the way, doesn't do anything for victims except maybe revenge. They're cut out of the process.
Exactly.
It's the state against the person. So it's not even necessarily a satisfying process for the victim.
None of it addresses the problem we're trying to solve.
Right.
That's what's so...
So you look at healing spaces, whatever that means. The unraveling of this machine and this beast is like totally overwhelming. So I can't give you like steps, I would say, but I do think that in a healthier society, we'd be looking at not what did you do wrong. Well, we would be looking at that too, but we'd really be asking the question also, what happened to you, and going to that. Yeah,
and that's what I'm interested in
first.
Yeah, exactly. I'll admit straight up, like, I kind of don't believe in free will. Like, you know, I And
there's a great podcast on that through On Being that you should listen to.
On Being is great.
I can't remember who the guy was, but it's really you got to listen to it.
It is the episode's called On Being, or that's
the
podcast
podcast.
Okay.
And then the guy, I have to look back. I remember his was near Martin Sheen's, but he's somebody who looks at also is like I really don't think we have free will. Sorry guys. Yeah. Martin Sheen is pretty awesome also, by the way.
Yeah, I mean,
super activist.
Devin over here would I mean, he's West Wing is like on rotation, heavy rotation.
But he's like
his bedtime stories.
So you would really get along with my parents. But Martin Sheen was like a major activist. He's been arrested, et cetera, et cetera. Oh, we got a good question.
Caits is always looking over at the question board.
It's hard
over
not
here.
to, It's just
So how could the literary world be on the front line of change? Whether it's abolition or just reform or whatever you want to call it. What can books do?
Well, I think that, that word ecosystem I use a lot because I think people play different roles, right? So I'm not on the front lines of a protest like Martin Sheen. I play a different role, right? In terms of literary world, I mean, I debate back and forth around, the good old hierarchy of need and how important is literature anyway, and what am I even doing with art? I have all these kind of questions when people have really dire needs. But I do think what the literary world is pretty impressive at in the last couple of years is really shifting to whose voices we value. And it's not good enough yet, but there's been a lot of emphasis on moving towards really being inclusive, uplifting voices that have been underheard, quote unquote, looking at who's left out of the conversation, valuing different kinds of writing. So I think that we can make statements with saying that we value the voices of people in prison, bring them into our work. Not easy to do. Again, that's a whole other conversation. We may be doing an event on that actually this year, so keep your eyes out if you're in New York City in March, maybe.
Cool.
I think, of course, imagination. Artists are always able to imagine a world that isn't. But also, obviously writing about issues too, but the question with that always is, who's the audience? How's the word getting out there? Who's reading it? Who's reading, period? So I think that we have to look at it as a microcosm. So how do we sort of live the principles in our work that we want to see in the world? But I also think that has to happen on a personal level outside of literature with individuals as human beings, which is a very hard thing to do on a day-to-day basis. It requires constant questioning of how am I interacting? What does forgiveness look like? What does being accountable look like? What does admitting my wrong look like, even when it's really embarrassing and painful, and I don't want to,
Yeah, that's one of the hardest things about thinking about how literature changes the world, because so often I feel lately how contemporary literature is often on the front lines of very sort of progressive causes and realizations and ideations, and then you realize that you sort of step out of that and you realize that the best-selling literary fiction book is nothing compared to the newest Drake song.
But you do hope for trickle down, and I think that you're right. Literature is where a lot of new ideas start, and then you get somebody like Jay-Z, who Molly Crabapple illustrated, doing a video on the New York Times about the marijuana industry now, being run by white people who are benefiting and getting all this money, while the folks who were selling it on the corner are totally cut out of now being legal.
True.
White people versus people of color, obviously. So I think it does start to infiltrate, and it's not a direct correlation always, but look at a Kendrick Lamar, for example. That guy has to be reading. He's brilliant.
Oh,
you know what I mean? He's probably devours
I think
books.
To your point, so many of these things begin in art.
Yeah.
And you look, no, I love that you brought up Jay-Z. It also makes me think of Pusha T in terms of just this implicit bias of criminals, right? And what their mindset is, and what is criminality. Okay, if whoever makes OxyContin, I want to say Purdue, but that's a chicken company.
It might be Purdue.
It might be Purdue.
No idea.
It's Kellogg owns.
I forget.
That aren't cereal.
But they're fucking pushing drugs. That's what they're doing, and so.
Well,
I'm trying not to make this what I'm trying to get at is these people are obviously very smart. So you listen to a Pusha T song, and he has a line in his newest album about how they didn't even think about giving a hip hop artist other than like, you know, someone like Will Smith. That's like
kind of love him still though.
Yeah,
I just do.
Wholesome.
Independence
Beautiful.
Day, one of the greatest fucking movies
Great
ever
family.
made.
Totally would win for president
awesome.
if you ran.
And a decently. Oh, it is Purdue. Wow, God, I'm fucking good. Anyway, either that or I'm just like way too obsessed with like addiction and drugs and stuff. But but what I'm saying is like he has a line about how they didn't even think about giving a Grammy to someone like Jay-Z until he did Annie, which was Hard Knock Life. It's a hard knock life. For, like all that shit. Like, and it's like you listen to Pusha T's lyrics and it's like this dude is just a fucking genius. And it's like, where did it come from? It clearly comes from the same thing that it comes from for any of us. It's like, so your circumstances clearly dictate what you do with your life. And I can't judge someone for selling drugs when people want to do drugs. And we refuse to like investigate why that might be the case and what kind of harm reduction initiatives can be put there.
A lot more people agree with that now, and that's because of the new Jim Crow, Michelle Alexander. And you teach, Devin, you know, at a high school I used to teach at in the South Bronx. The principal had the whole, all the teachers reading and administration reading the new Jim Crow. So then that infiltrates their classrooms. So I think that's, I mean, nothing's going to be perfect in terms of, I think, how we deal with these massive issues in our society. And sometimes I'm a total pessimist. And actually, I'm like, you know, we're really screwed. Like this, we're destroying our planet. I take some comfort in the fact that the Earth will probably regenerate once we're gone. Many people probably find that frightening.
Oh my
God. A lot
God.
of people will be in pain first before that, which is not good to think about.
You're gonna love our second novel that we're putting out by David Hollander. It's called the working title's Anthropica. I don't know if we're gonna stick with that.
Okay.
But it's about a group that wants to essentially unleash these robots that will basically, you know, kill humanity. Yeah, and there's this idea that like there's all this stuff to it.
Happening
but, like,
with Boston Dynamics.
That's
crazy dog robots.
Oh, I know. Those are so scary. They're like Black Mirror.
Crazy. They call for help.
Something I'm thinking. This is a question I'm thinking about a lot because for example, people are making hand signals in the background. I'm getting distracted. Sorry. What am I saying? She
wants me to plug David Hollander's new Twitter handle because in his novel,
the website's great. The
website's amazing, right?
It's very good.
You know, all hail Katie Rainey, our producer. But essentially, he just came up with this Twitter handle, and it's through Fexo, one of the robots in his novel. Mm-hmm. It's through his voice, and it is fucking hilarious. Some of my favorite parts of the book is basically Fexo tries to write stories like a human.
That's the only thing I want to follow on Twitter. I went on it today, and I quickly I was so overwhelmed by the intensity of it. Yeah. But I will be following this one.
Yeah, do it. It's hilarious.
It's longlivetheauthor.com, and it's at the Fexo. At the TEH FEXO.
Yeah, FEXO. Yeah, longlivetheauthor.com is his website. At the Fexo, his Twitter handle. It is hilarious. I'm obsessed with it. I'm so excited to put his book out.
I'm excited to read it. Yeah. And just to go back to like, what can literature do?
Yes,
if that's okay.
Yes, that's what
which I think about a lot from a pessimistic standpoint. But I'm also teaching a class this summer at Poet's House that's about. Well, let me ask this first, Devin. Have you ever written a poem, something in a poem that then later comes true, and you're like, "Whoa, that's weird."
Sure.
So you sort of accidentally predicted something but like in a very specific way.
Yeah. I just published an essay about this. Ties into everything we're talking about right now. I just published an essay on anti-heroin chic, and it's about me becoming friends with this jazz drummer, and he like sat outside this like dental clinic. And it was unclear what he did for them, but he worked there, quote unquote. Sorry, Devin, I'm going to let you like say your thing. But this like literally I have a scene in my novel where Julia runs into this like trumpet busker, and he starts talking about like she starts talking about how her dad just died from he relapsed on meth and all this shit. And essentially they have this conversation. They form this little friendship or whatever. And like this happened with me with this, except the roles were kind of reversed in the sense that I realized that he was like dishonest, but I really liked him, and I noticed a lot of myself in him just if our circumstances had kind of been switched, you know. Essentially what it boiled down to was he said he was going to go do a tour in Florida. Before that, he said he was going to do a show at the Shrine. And he told me when, where, we show up, he's not there. Then he says he's going to do this tour in Florida for like a month, and then I see him like a week later, and he looks like really strung out on this bench, and he's kind of like got like ranting paranoically or whatever, like about like, oh, don't tell people where I'm living and stuff like that. And it was really sad, but like I really liked him a lot, and like I really saw myself in him, like. And so, yeah, anyway, I can really relate to that.
Yeah, not just poems, writing in general.
Yeah, something that happened, like, that I wrote about, and I was like, wow, this is eerie. You know?
No, I mean, yes, it's happened to me. That's all.
Do you have a specific poem? Or
not like that it's sort of, I think that feeling of writing into a feeling you didn't know you had. And then, as if the poem has given you permission to feel that in the real world, and then so after the writing of the poem or the piece, it is like so often writing is not actually an articulation of what you feel. It is sort of it's a radical imagination, and then the writing grants you the ability then to feel this new thing. You write yourself into newness.
Exactly. So, with that said, beautifully articulated, this class I'm teaching is about that energy, but trying to harness that energy. So there's some woo-woo stuff involved in it, I won't lie. I like some woo-woo tarot card stuff, you know. I'm like, you know, I enjoy it. I'm still a skeptic.
Katie can get down with that.
Great, Katie, me and you. But also I'm using a lot of movement principles, like activist movement principles, for creating poems and really thinking about actually reimagining the world by harnessing this energy of writing into something new, writing into a new world. What does it look like? And thinking about, I'm really looking at this book, Emergent Strategy, as sort of the baseline that I'm hopping out of. It's a great book. And thinking about biomimicry, and which is the practice of looking at nature and natural responses for solutions.
Biomimicry.
Right, yeah.
Is that different? Like, it makes me think of mimesis. Just like mimesis is just like the kind of just the people copying people, and that's how culture kind of forms. Like, I don't know. Is there any relation?
But instead of people, it's
the world.
It's the
natural world.
The natural world.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Cool.
So, I mean, while I'm a skeptic and like, who knows how all this will go, I'm still, I still believe, obviously, that it's worth trying and doing, and having literature be in conversation with what a better world looks like or could be. You know, so
I just think it's important that, like, honestly, like, you know, this is my own woo-woo shit, but like, I really do think literature is very important just in terms of being able to imagine outside of yourself, and I don't think there's anything else that replaces that. I don't think movies do it in the same way. You have to actively decode and encode like what someone is saying on paper, and if you defamiliarize your language and all that stuff, it's just an exercise that cannot be replicated anywhere else. And once people can get into that, like, you really just start to be, you're like, whoa, if I can do this, like, if I can translate what this person's mind is doing, like, this is just connecting all of us, you know? And I do, like, I don't think there's any better way to do it. I don't think through a movie you can do that. You know, you can't get in someone's psychology like that. And so in terms of, like, prison reform, just showing people that, like, these people are in there, and they can connect right back with you in the same way, just like anyone else. More than anything, that, like, the content. Like, you know, I'm kind of like talking like in a psycho, like, analytic way right now, but like, you know, process over content. You know what I mean? It's like, what are we doing here together? I don't know. I hope that doesn't sound like crazy, like abstruse, but
no, not at all.
Let's do a Kratom check-in. So far, I feel Kratom. Katie feels it. Katie's
what is
going
it?
like,
What do you? How would you describe it? Because I feel good right now.
It's like,
but I don't know if it's like noticeable, if I'm just having a nice time with you.
I see, because and I didn't give you much. Like, I gave you a very low dose. It's kind of, people get kind of afraid of it because of, like, okay, so if you smoked a gram of marijuana, you would be fucking lit off your ass. You know, like, just done. Like, a gram of Kratom is an extremely low dose, and I probably gave you about a gram, maybe 2 or something. And so, like, at those lower ends of the at the lower range, it's more of an energizing sort of mood uplifting thing. But if you take enough of it, it can act as like a pain reliever, like analgesic, like, you know, kind of thing. So yeah, I mean, you might be able to notice it. I don't know. Could be placebo, could be the conversation. Who knows?
Sometimes after I drink more than 2 cups of coffee, which this would be, I get really jittery feeling, and I don't feel that way.
Yeah, right. Well, that'll take that away.
I do mushroom coffee, which tastes like coffee, but not great coffee.
What is mushroom coffee?
It's similar. It's just, it has...
You're not microdosing
It's just too
psychedelic mushrooms.
No. Yeah. It's too expensive. But
like, who should be
mushrooms that chaga reishi, I'm not even sure I'm pronouncing them right, that similarly like boost your mood, concentration. It makes the intake for me of coffee much gentler. Yeah, I don't know. But it's pricey, which I hate.
Yeah. How could we expand the literary community with prison communities in a positive way outside of just writing programs in prisons? That's an interesting question.
Yeah, I have a lot of ideas.
Yeah, go ahead.
Always. I think that if literary community broadly is interested in this, let's say literary journals, literary readings, first of all, you have to make it accessible. So what do folks in prison need, which is the question of equity. What does somebody need, right? Folks in prison have to figure out where to submit. Now, Writer's Digest only tells you the name of the publication, the genre, and what the dates are. Well, how the hell do you know what kind of stuff is in there? And if it's a literary journal that's online, you don't have access unless you have an advocate on the outside who's able to do that.
That's
for
the
you.
kind of thing that upsets me about their lack of access to internet. I think that's kind of...
And then also submission fees.
Yeah, of course. So the question is one, are literary journals open to sending back to an incarcerated writer some examples of the work they've published? Are they willing to accept outside of their submission window, because it may have changed from what's in this book from 3 years ago in the library that they're looking at? Are they willing to not only do an incarcerated writer's issue, but to just open the gates to people who are in prison to submit? For example, this is great. I just got a phone call recently from a fellowship that was quite a bit of money in Oregon who called me and said, how do you deal with awarding money to writers in prison? What are the rules? Which is complicated and complex. And we had that dialogue, not a straightforward answer, risk involved. And I said, okay, it was not a fellowship for incarcerated writers. It was for just writers, period. And she said, I didn't realize that one of our fellows is incarcerated until I got to the address. And I said, I love to hear that, first of all. Second of all, I know it's not public yet, but can you tell me who it is? And when she said his name, I was like, I knew it. It's that's amazing. It's a writer we've done a lot with.
Can you say their name?
I don't know if it's announced yet.
You're not, okay, yeah, fair enough.
I wish. Awesome. But that, for me, that's a win. We still do need spaces that, of course, hook to the identity, so that does a lot of advocacy too. We're not changing at Penn our prison writing awards anytime soon. That's important for a lot of people still. It gives a lot of permission as well. But I think that the more that we seed voices in quote-unquote normal outside literary spaces, also, for example, something I've been interested in doing, and it's really overwhelming to think about, but it's an idea I have, is how do we get open mics to be featuring writers in prison's work? That means somebody takes on the voice, really, and steps in to read the piece. There's a lot of ethical questions about that.
What's the name of the fellowship?
I don't know. I'm sorry.
No?
It's in Oregon, just for writers in Oregon.
Okay.
Yeah,
fair enough.
I can't remember.
We'll figure it out.
Yeah, I'll look it up too and see if it's been announced, actually.
Yeah.
Maybe I'll do that shortly. I can write down the person's name for you. You can look it up.
Would you... I like this question that our producers just put up. Is there any writing that you'd like to share?
Sure.
So Caits is looking up some writing from a one of someone you've been working with. I assume.
I'll read a Penn Award-winning poet because it's just easiest to find that since it's published online. So
and where are they? Can you say?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, sure. They're on Penn.org.
No, I mean where is this person now?
Oh,
physically. Is that not?
No, it's not that I just don't know off the top of my head necessarily.
Got it.
So I'm like, let me find. Maybe I'll read you the award. First place award winner this year. It's Matthew Mendoza. He's won multiple times and in multiple categories. He also won with a play that we put up, a 10-minute long play with a group of actors that were formerly incarcerated as part of Rehabilitation Through the Arts alumni theater program, and they brought the house down. They were amazing.
Where did it take place?
At the Brooklyn Book Festival, which is where we'll be next year again. So it was absolutely unbelievable. There's actually a great, really nicely produced video online. If you just search Breakout Voices from the Inside, Penn America 2018, you can watch it. It's at the very end. And it's about all these people in the prison debating about a prisoner turned into a bird and flew away.
Wow.
It's wonderful. So, but this poem is called Grace Notes by Matthew Mendoza. I believe he's in New Mexico. Let's read his bio and I can tell you. Texas. Just kidding. Matthew Mendoza is in prison in Texas. His work has been published in Atlanta Review, Big Muddy, and Comstock Review. He wants to thank Penn for changing the way he does time.
Ooh. That's amazing.
Well, I got a wonderful letter back from him, too, because we send, I always call it evidence, which feels weird in the context of prison, but we send back packages of photographs, program, impressions from the show. We send it all back to the writers who don't know that their work is being put up. We really choose what is the most performable, essentially. And some of the letters we've gotten back from people are just astonishing. And he said something like, a real group of actors on the outside on a real stage put my play up, and nobody can take that away from me.
That's amazing. Yeah, that's so cool.
Which is just, you realize the impact of things that are so small and we take for granted on the outside, you know? So here's Grace Notes by Matthew Mendoza. If there is a place of grace, it is not here beside the seasonal stream. The water does all the things that water does, burble, trickle, rush, and roar, like the moments of our days become lives wearing a smooth. We are not river stones. There is no grace here. This is just water. Just like food is not love, and washing your hands of the heart's stains is just a myth. Forgiveness does not flow like water. It's fall. It's always fall now. Leaves are not hands. Still I read their palms. My fingers drift along the frame of the still leaf. I tell the leaf, sometimes you are outgoing. Sometimes you are wary. You find it scary to reveal too much. The trees share decades, but their leaves are short-lived. Forgotten moments frozen in an orange fire. I practice forgiveness and gratitude and mumble a jumbled prayer as I set the leaf sail. I follow the glassed glide of its early journey, then, as I stumble over dirt, beer cans, condoms, this becomes a mirror of my own life. The stem, like dreams, make an impotent rudder. The leaf drifts past a rock. As my leaf circles in the eddy of a near miss, a boulder becomes a matter of perspective. My own hurt becomes the stream. My pain wearing smooth the lives of people I love. I watch the leaf circle, circle, sink. I go back to the place I started and find another leaf. If this one sinks, I'll find another. I know that this stream is not forgiveness or goodness or grace, but it is the only water I have.
Man.
Just a little plug to say, come to our next show, what we did with that poem. I'm so proud of this. We invited some currently incarcerated musicians at Sing Sing to score music to our award-winning poems.
Oh, wow.
3 of them.
Cool.
And we had a string quartet, Music Cambia, on the outside, who teaches in prison, performed the music. And then the person who read that poem, who did a tremendous job, Ian Manuel, his poetry is featured in Brian Stevenson's Just Mercy, who's like a big name in criminal justice reform. And Ian's story is that he was incarcerated at 13 for shooting a woman in the jaw who lived after stealing her purse and was in solitary confinement for something like 18 years.
Wow.
And he's out now, obviously. He performed that poem. He's a poet himself. And he also reconciled with the woman he shot. They're friends. There's actually a video online of it that was pretty viral.
Yeah.
So that's a story
is incredible.
Of redemption and restoration that's pretty unbelievable.
Uh-huh.
He was a kid. That might make it easier, but there are stories that are pretty tremendous.
So
that was the reading of that poem, better than mine.
No, it's just amazing. Like, I feel like if you have that kind of, I don't even know what to call that. Like, if you're putting that stuff out in the world and you get that kind of feedback and like that kind of validation, like how much more likely are you to just start thinking more positively? And I don't know. Yeah.
How much does that do for us? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like,
for
of
everyone.
course, you know?
Exactly.
Of course. And everything's heightened in that space, obviously.
So I was going to ask this anyways, but it's up on the board. Is there any way we can get Matthew to hear this podcast, or is that absolutely impossible?
Well, you could do it over the phone.
Over the phone?
Yeah, probably would have to get somebody's number. Could be Penn. I could do it on his call list, and then he could call me, and I could play it over the phone.
Cool.
That's probably the only way. Sometimes people can see things if there's like a chaplain with access to the internet, but every prison's different, and most that's not possible. And But yeah, we could definitely do it over
we have
the phone.
10 million subscribers.
We're working.
That poem has been a lot of places too, because it's such a beautiful piece. I've read it so many closed events, this and that, and yeah.
I have to admit, it strikes me immediately that like so many. It just feels like someone like that just has so much more to say than like your average MFA grad that like comes out and just says like, you know, does like a reading, like, you know, because they're trying to get their name out there, and there's nothing wrong with that at all. Like, you know, I say this like half out of like, you know, my like I tease poets all the time.
Yeah,
know?
I was
Bring
waiting.
it on.
I was waiting.
Bring it on.
I was waiting for us to shit on
right.
poetry.
Let's do it.
Yeah, right. Like, let's just start shitting on everyone. No, but no, I mean, you can easily tell, like, there's just so much there. Like, you know, it's like, it's so many times I just hear, like, you know, the younger, like, MFA poets come out, and it's just like a word salad, like, that, you know, tries to sound pretty and, like, all that shit. And it's honestly stuff like, you know, I don't know. Yeah. And I don't say this out of any form of nepotism. It's like kind of like the opposite of the stuff that Devin writes, you know, like that kind of like the like those MFA poets that just like, it just feels like so many of them don't have anything to say yet. It's like there's just this reaching for profundity, but it's just like not.
Well, you have to live in order to write.
You have to live, and like it doesn't matter what age you are, but there is a correlation between that and like someone like Matthew, where it's like, it's just like, even in a craft based sense, like just every word does so much work, you know.
Mm-hmm.
It's because of that, you know, and he's obviously very talented, you know.
But you also don't have to live a certain conception of what it is to live in order to write.
That's
I
right.
think that because then you can you could apply that same statement to people making stereotypical comments about people in prison.
Sure.
And about, like, I mean, I like, your life doesn't have to be a generic version of a struggle in order to write something profound.
I totally agree. Suffering is not the only thing that writing needs, you know.
Yeah,
for sure.
But at the same time, yeah, it's not.
Well, I think, too, you get a poet or a writer like somebody like Matthew, who's exceptionally talented across genre and a very serious writer. And I think what you're getting at, which is, you know, we always can borderline on stereotype when we make generalizations. But what you're getting at, I think, is that somebody who has the skill and ability to translate some of the deepest questions and themes of humanity. Mm-hmm. And some of those deepest themes and questions of humanity happen in spaces like prison because it's such hyper reality in a specific way. Yeah. Some of the hardest questions of humanity. So
and I will say that's why our tagline is books that matter. Like we are, like, you know, and we try so hard to not make that sound like, who the fuck is trying to write books that publish books that don't matter. But no, like the deepest questions about humanity, like, you know, not being afraid to go somewhere, like, and the prison industrial complex is such a good analog for this, because like if you don't want to look at that darkness, then what are you really doing? Sure. You know?
Well, right. So. And that's a space of rampant darkness. Not that all of humanity isn't, but it's so concentrated there, and you're so isolated and separated and all of that, you know?
Yeah. How's everyone doing Kratom wise? Caits, is there?
I'm happy.
Is it discernible from your default existential state?
I'm feeling really like light. I often don't feel good. I have like a lot of health stuff that's a bummer.
Ooh.
And today I'm
sorry to hear that. That's like the worst.
Well, I've also been exercising consistently, which I think, you know,
that helps.
Makes a big difference.
Yes, I definitely notice a sharp decline in my mental health when I stop exercising.
Me too.
Yeah,
physical, everything.
Yeah. Well, Devin runs 80 miles every
I know.
hour,
Listen, this guy. Impressive.
So I guess the consensus is Kratom is great.
Oh, okay.
Okay. And so, like, don't fucking ban it.
Don't ban Miller High Life
I could definitely get on that board with that statement.
Right,
Miller High Life. The champagne.
Although
beers.
I think of all things, alcohol, we could talk about that another
We
day.
probably
Even though I
should.
do drink, I mean, for sure.
I mean, I love alcohol.
I should take a
sip. Just, you know, it's like, honestly, I think it's like the worst drug. I think it sucks.
Well, we just have to have better conversations about drugs that include alcohol. But no, we should not have prohibition. That's a terrible idea.
Should we talk? I mean, Sergio's a DA. I mean, like, I think we could talk about that with him for sure.
I think we should talk about everything with Sergio because he's going to have a total insider. I mean, my whole approach to these conversations is through such a specific lens, but his is through the legal lens is fascinating, obviously. I'm excited to hear him talk.
Yeah.
Okay, that's it for today's episode. If you like what you heard, please subscribe and review on whichever platform you're listening. You can get in touch with us on Twitter at Animal Riot Press or Facebook and Instagram under the same name, or through our website, animalriotpress.com. This has been the 7th episode of the Animal Riot Podcast with your host, Brian Birnbaum, and featuring Caits Meissner and Devin Kelly. Transcripts for our deaf and hard of hearing animals are provided by Jonathan Kay, and we are produced by me, Katie Rainey. See you later, you filthy animals.
Yes, sir, it's the burn. Bombing on y'all and getting gully as a fern. I don't know much about